Good evening. I'm Bergen County Executive Jim Tedesco, and I'm honored to welcome you to the third annual Domestic Violence Awareness Symposium hosted by the Borough of New Milford, the New Milford Police Department, and the New Milford Public School District. I would also like to thank some of tonight's event partners, including the county's Alternative to Domestic Violence Division, who I must recognize for their outstanding efforts providing core services throughout the pandemic, as well as the Bergen County Prosecutor's Office, the Bergen County Sheriff's Office, and our partner, the Center for Hope and Safety, who have been supporting women and children for 4 decades here in Bergen County. Domestic violence is a crime that uses physical, emotional, sexual, psychological, or economic control and abuse to violate the dignity, security, and humanity of its victims. When someone you love hurts you in this way, it is a crime beyond the abuse itself. It is a violation of your trust in that person and your trust in yourself. As we recognize Domestic Violence Awareness Month, it is important to remember that it affects every single demographic of all races, creeds, ethnicities, backgrounds, and social status. 1 in 3 women and 1 in 4 men have experienced some form of physical violence by an intimate partner. However, it does hurt some groups more than others. 85% of people abused by a partner are women. And young women, ages 16 to 24, are the group most likely to be victimized. Tonight, you will hear powerful stories of survival and a roundtable from experts in the field. Together, we are all working to support those harmed by domestic violence and help them to live independent, violence-free lives and heal from the pain and trauma of their abuse. I'm grateful and honored to represent you as your Bergen County Executive, and I am standing with you today and every day to reduce the incidence of domestic violence, support victims and survivors compassionately, and keep our communities safe. Thank you.
Good evening, and thank you for joining us. I'm New Milford Councilman Matthew Seymour, and I'd like to welcome you to our 3rd annual Domestic Violence Awareness Symposium, which we hold every year in October in recognition of Domestic Violence Awareness Month. As everyone is aware, domestic violence is not only a threat to individuals and their personal safety, mental health, well-being, and peace of mind, it's also a threat to the very fabric of our society and threatens to tear families apart at the seams. So it's my honor to introduce the superintendent of the New Milford Schools, Danielle Shanley, who has graciously not only hosted us, but partnered with us in presenting this event to the entire community. Ms. Shanley.
Okay, sorry about that. Good evening, everyone. I'd like to thank Matt Seymour and our Borough Council, our Mayor, Mike Petrino, and the Board of Education for partnering on this very important topic. I'd also like to thank all of the panelists sitting behind me here tonight. Special thanks to Dan Preet for the wonderful technology that I almost messed up right there. It's been a while since we've opened our doors to the public because of COVID. And you should know that all of us here tonight have been screened for COVID. So if you see us removing our masks, that is why, so we can better communicate with you. But we thought that domestic violence was a worthy cause to open our doors this evening. I can't think of a better location than our schools to continue lifelong learning and growing and supporting each other as a community in Bergen County. I often say that at 2.5 square miles, New Milford is small but mighty. During COVID, schools have been working not only to educate our students, but also to support them and often support their families in their social and emotional well-being while we were trying to learn in a remote environment and then return to some sense of normalcy. I'm sure it's no surprise to many of you that during COVID, the confines of seclusion became a dangerous situation for some people. Domestic violence is definitely and sadly something that schools do deal with entirely too often, and it's something our students struggle with entirely too often. So I thank all of you for attending tonight, and I thank those of you who are at home in attendance watching us. For those of you in need, my hope is that tonight brings you some help and some hope for a safer tomorrow. And I'd like to introduce our mayor, Mike Petrino.
Good evening, and welcome to New Milford's third annual Domestic Violence Symposium. I will read a proclamation. Office of the Mayor Proclamation. Whereas, domestic violence is widespread and affects more than 12 million Americans each year. And whereas, according to statistics, 24 people per minute in America are victims of rape, stalking, or physical violence by an intimate partner. And whereas, this means about 3 in 10 women and 1 in 10 men are victims or survivors of domestic violence. And whereas, domestic violence is a serious crime that affects people of all ages, races, genders, and socioeconomic status. And whereas children that grow up in violent homes are believed to be abused and neglected at a rate higher than the national average. And whereas domestic violence costs the nation's billions of dollars annually in medical expenses, police and court costs, shelters, foster care, sick leave, absenteeism, and overall non-productivity. And whereas only awareness and coordinated community effort will shine a light and put a stop to this criminal behavior. And whereas the Borough of New Milford has developed partnerships with the county, state, and private organizations to spread awareness and education, and is committed to the safety and security of all of our residents and to prosecuting perpetrators of domestic violence. And whereas Domestic Violence Month provides an excellent opportunity for residents to learn more about preventing domestic violence and to show support for the numerous organizations and individuals who provide critical advocacy, services, and assistance to victims and survivors. Now therefore I, Mayor Michael Petrino, do hereby proclaim October 2021 as Domestic Violence Awareness Month in New Milford and urge residents to know the signs, to report suspected abuse, and to reject and denounce behavior that mimics, minimizes, or makes fun of domestic violence in real life, movies, internet gaming, or in any other circumstances. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor, and thank you, Superintendent. At this time, it is my honor and privilege to introduce the Bergen County Prosecutor, Mark Masella.
Good evening. I want to thank Mayor Petrino for inviting me here tonight to say a few words. I want to also thank Chief Clancy, Councilman Seymour for organizing this event, and of course, Ms. Shanley. I also want to thank tonight's panelists for participating, and thank you to all of you that are in attendance tonight. October is Domestic Violence Awareness Month, and tonight's event is a collaboration of advocates, agencies, and government officials who are here to talk about the scourge of domestic violence. We are here tonight to raise awareness. We are here to provide education about how to end the cycle of domestic violence, and we are here tonight to provide support and encouragement to the survivors of domestic violence. According to the CDC, 1 in 4 women and 1 in 10 men experience some form of abuse from an intimate partner. The abuse is sexual, physical, and mental, and it has lifelong effects on the survivor as well as those around him and her. What that translates to locally is that during the first 9 months of this year, the Bergen County Prosecutor's Office has taken in 838 new domestic violence cases, 332 of which were violations of restraining orders. The effect of domestic violence crosses generations. They are economic, social, and all too often fatal. It is through events like this that we learn what is being done and what still needs to be done. In addition to the work of the Bergen County Prosecutor's Office Domestic Violence Unit, which has been led by Senior Assistant Prosecutor Jessica Gompertz for many years, the work of our community partners who advocate, connect, and serve is critically important. Agencies like Alternatives to Domestic Violence, the Women's Rights Information Center, Healing Space, the Center for Hope and Safety, and a Partnership for Change are impacting lives every day. Thank you to each of tonight's panelists for your perseverance, your tenacity, and your commitment to making our communities and our residents safer. I look forward to tonight's discussion, and I want to thank you for having me, and thank you for being here in attendance.
Thank you, Mr. Marcella. To begin this year, I think it's important to take a step back and recognize that there are many misconceptions as to what constitutes and what does not constitute domestic violence. So to begin, I'm going to ask the Senior Assistant Prosecutor of the Bergen County Prosecutor's Office, and who is the Chief of the Bergen County Prosecutor's Office's Domestic Violence Squad, Ms. Jessica Gompertz, to tell all of you what is domestic violence. Ms. Gompertz.
Thank you, Matt. Domestic violence, as we heard in the prosecutor's opening remarks, is violence between intimate partners, physical violence, sexual violence, other aggressive types of violence, but it is also what we less typically think of: emotional violence, psychological violence, other types of abuse, financial abuse, other types of psychological manipulation. The laws of New Jersey are very broad, but very inclusive, and really provide some great protections for victims who are not just victimized in what we would think of as typical ways by intimate partners: hitting, slapping, pushing, kicking, strangulation. But the laws are broader and protect victims from other types of control and abuse, such as psychological, emotional, stalking, being terrorized through words, being threatened in other ways, to be, if you're in the country unlawfully or undocumented, to have ICE called on you. If you're a member of the LGBTQ community, to be outed to your job or your community. We've seen in the past several years large upticks in cyber harassment, with the use of social media and computers being used to bully and intimidate and harass victims and threaten to distribute lewd or indecent photographs or videos to their community and to their job. So although domestic violence is a lot of what many of us grew up watching in after-school specials about, the woman who shows up with the black eye. It is also, and what we're going to hear a lot about tonight, the psychological torture that many people do not think about, but is really a huge part of the control and the manipulation that goes into what makes these abusers and this abuse so very insidious, and also so very, very difficult of a cycle to break.
Thank you, Ms. Gomberts. Before turning to the next phase of our program, I'd like to ask Ms. Catherine Tanis, who works for Bergen County's Alternatives to Domestic Violence, to please, of course, explain your role with ADV as a counselor and a therapist, and also to expound upon Ms. Gombert's point, which she just made, that domestic violence also includes emotional and psychological harm inflicted upon an individual. Would you please speak to the impact of that trauma?
Thank you, Matt. Yes. The impact of abuse is so damaging in that people, victims, survivors, we prefer to call them, will question their own sense of reality. They will question their self-views, anything that they've previously considered as part of life. It all can be dismantled progressively. There also is a reluctance for survivors to share their experiences with their usual support systems or to reach out for services, questioning their own mental health due to abusers' language, telling them that they're crazy, they're oversensitive, they're too reactive. These impact the thoughts and feelings that can lead to avoidance or a type of emotional shutdown of confronting what is happening. When someone calls the Alternatives to Domestic Violence hotline, one of the most important things we want to do for them is to validate that they have taken a big step in reaching out and contacting us to let someone know that what they're describing are abusive behaviors, to validate that what they have experienced is real. And when people hear that, they often are shocked, they're a little numb or profoundly grateful, and we really value that person's right to self-determination. Are they wanting to come in and meet with a counselor for what we call crisis case management? Are they interested in learning more? It's an educational, it's just no commitment. Or do they want to call back again? And we also let them know they can speak to an evening or a weekend or a night counselor if they just feel that they need to reach out and talk to someone. The systematic coercive control, the critical, demeaning, and vulgar language, deprivations, whether they're accompanied with strangulation attempts, death threats, or demeaning sexual or physical abuse, lead to many post-traumatic stress symptoms. We really focus on what those symptoms are without trying to label it as a pathology, without labeling it as a disorder, because many survivors have felt that they are so worthless, so damaged, and so embarrassed. I could go on and on about the effects of trauma, but I'm going to hold that for now, if that's agreeable, Matt.
Thank you. Ms. Gomberts, is there a particular type of relationship that is required for there to be domestic violence? Or does domestic violence occur in multiple types of relationships.
Do you mean required under the law in New Jersey or more monumentally? Like,
Both. Both.
So in order to qualify as domestic violence under the law in New Jersey, there are 4 categories. It's either someone who is a spouse or a former spouse, a present or former household member, somebody with whom you have a child in common, or somebody that you are in a dating or a former dating relationship. So that's the legal definition to fall under the Prevention of Domestic Violence Act. That is the law that is in the criminal code. But sort of more globally, no, I think that domestic violence can occur no matter what the relationship is. I think that there are certain relationships that lend themselves certainly to different types of domestic violence being more prevalent. I think that there are certain types of manipulation and control that are certainly easier to achieve where there is an imbalance in, let's say, money or social status or legality in the country. Oftentimes we see that where there is somebody in the relationship who, let's say, is a police officer or a politician or somebody who is the president of a company or a CEO, they use that position to scare the victim into silence by telling them that nobody will believe them because I am a police officer and I know how to get around the system, or I am the president of this company, nobody will believe you because I am this person and everyone will believe me. In undocumented, people who are in this country undocumented or in the country unlawfully, I've had many, many victims tell me that they were scared because their abuser held out the threat of calling immigration on them because the abuser was in the country lawfully, they were in the country unlawfully, and so they were scared of that. So certainly in relationships where there is a clear imbalance of power, that type of relationship structure sets up more opportunity for certain types of abuse. But as I think we're going to hear in a minute, there are some times where there is no clear indication that there is a relationship that is going to become abusive, and there is no model of a victim. Their victimization knows no age, knows no socioeconomic background, knows no religion, knows no gender, knows no sexual orientation, knows no race, no creed, no color. We have victims who fall into every single conceivable category because domestic violence is not necessarily a crime of opportunity. It doesn't have anything to do with the victim. Domestic violence has everything to do with the abuser. So there is no real way to put the victim in a category. You can't categorize the victims like that. It's about the abuser. I don't know if that answered your question.
It did. Thank you, Jessica. I believe that everybody here would agree that the biggest heroes in this area are the survivors. The survivors who have the courage, the strength, and the wherewithal to step up, step forward, and say no more to abuse. The courage to put themselves first in their own safety, their own well-being, their own mental health, and to put the safety and well-being of their children and their families first as well. We are very fortunate tonight to be joined by survivors who have come here courageously to share their story with you. Ms. Gombers, would you like to introduce your survivor?
So this is Olivia, and you're going to go down and speak at the mic. I'm going to let Olivia tell her story because not only would I not be able to do it justice, I would never deign to speak one word for this woman because she has a much stronger voice than I could ever hope to have for 1 minute in my life. Take it away.
Thank you so much, Jessica. My name is Olivia Summer Hutcherson. First of all, before I say anything, I just want to thank Jessica. It is only because of her and honestly the grace of God that I am standing here right now. It's going to be a little challenging to try to fit the last 6 years into the next 6 minutes, but I'm going to do my best, so just bear with me. Thankfully, my domestic violence story only lasted 2 years out of the 6, but 2 minutes is too long. I'm going to rewind the clock a little bit. In 2015, I was a professional dancer, and I was at the highlight of my career. I was dancing for Jennifer Lopez and Madonna. I was a San Francisco 49ers cheerleader, and I was kind of at the prime of my life as far as my career goes. And I was suddenly diagnosed with aggressive breast cancer. It came from out of nowhere. My entire world got flipped upside down. I had to have a 15-hour surgery. I went through 4 rounds of chemotherapy, 10 rounds of radiation, and everything came crashing down as I knew it. I had to move home with my mother at 26, but my mom worked in a very large hospital, and my brother was never there. So I was facing tons of treatments on my own, and I was basically living in a hospital part-time. It was very lonely and it was very scary. And I say all that to say that on the journey of looking at a totally new world for myself, I spent a lot of time alone. And during that time, I wound up at a farmer's market one day, of all places. I'm from Atlanta, Georgia, so that's not uncommon to find me in a farmer's market. And I wasn't looking for anything except some sunflowers, and this guy spotted me. And I know it sounds cheesy, but it was like love at first sight. And he asked me out, and I said yes. And basically, we started hanging out all the time. He wanted to be there for me. He wanted to take me to my treatments. He wanted to cook for me. He wanted to be at the hospital with me. And within like 2 to 3 months, I was seeing him every single day, and he had become my Prince Charming. He was everything I had ever been looking for. And it was a very crazy time in my life because, like I said, I wasn't looking for anything, but there he was. And as I started getting stronger, because I beat cancer for the first time, as I started getting stronger and started getting my strength back and started getting jobs again and rebuilding, the energy shift started to change. And so he started getting jealous as I started to perform again, and little things started to creep up from his personality. Things like him taking my phone, things like him not liking the way I dressed. It was very small in the beginning. And then I'll never forget, after about 3 months of being together, he grabbed my arm and started screaming at me when I had an event and started calling me some horrible names. And I was crying my eyes out. I couldn't believe this was the same person who used to hold me in the hospital, but I let it go. I let it go. And I remember thinking, wow, that's not him. He probably just had a bad night. And this only continued to increase. One day turned into 2, turned into 3. But at that point, I had already developed what I would come to learn in time through therapy was called trauma bonding. And I was so attached to him because he had been there for me in such a dark time of my life that I began to make excuses for him. And because my mom was always at work and my brother was not around, he had become the primary character in my life. As time went on, the verbal became physical, and a shove became a poke, and within a year, I had been locked in a room for 18 hours. I had been punched in the mouth, and I finally did put a restraining order on him because things got so violent. I simultaneously got diagnosed with cancer for a second time. It came back and spread to my bones. And I was very afraid to die. He went to jail. And I didn't want to feel like I had left somebody in jail. So stupidly, I removed the restraining order, which I'm not proud of, but it was something I did because I didn't want to leave the planet and feel like I left someone in jail. Forgiveness has always been a big part of my character. So I stupidly removed the restraining order. He got out of jail, and immediately he started coming after me again. He vandalized my car, and he called me 1,000 times in one day, and we were right back to where we left off. One of the nicest things I have to say about Jessica is that she never judged me, ever. She never judged me. I have made so many mistakes, so many, but she never judged me. And neither did Myra. She's not here tonight, but she was one of the advocates that helped me. And I think that's so important to remember because I'm just one woman, but there are thousands out there going through this. And domestic violence is one of the most shameful things to go through in the world. I don't think any woman or man wakes up in the morning and says, I want to be beaten up. Nobody wakes up and says that. I think the only thing I was ever guilty of was wanting to be loved. I think that's what all of us want, if we were being honest. But I made mistakes, and I've had the opposite happen to me too, though. I went to North Bergen before, and I had a detective say to me, I'll never forget, he goes, "You again?" And he laughed at me, and he was like, "Are you trying to get murdered or something?" I'll never forget him saying that. And it made me feel unsafe. It made me feel like I couldn't come back if something bad happened. And so I did wind up filing a second restraining order, and it's been 1.5 years, and I've never heard from him again. And I'm just thankful to be standing here. There is no price tag for peace. That's it. There's no price tag for peace. And you know what? Friday night comes and I'm single and I don't get to take the Instagram selfie and put couple goals, but I have my peace. And I don't have anyone yelling at me, and I don't have anyone putting their hands on me, and I don't have anyone calling me a whore. And it's beautiful to just be able to have my peace. I wrote a poetry book in the middle of my battle with cancer, and it's called The Show Must Go On. And I know I'm probably over time, but would it be okay if I read one poem? Take your time. Okay. It's called Heal Me. And the opening line says, falling out of a toxic relationship for the 99th time, what's important is that you stand 100. I can feel it creeping in. There I go, I'm numb again. Spacing out between the lines, for 7 months I've said, I'm fine. Ironically, that's the same number of times that women return to their partners in crime, of abuse to the body and feminine divine. Then I wonder why I can't unwind. Nights are long and mornings aren't mine. I'm a slave to the flashbacks that run through my mind. Doctors diagnosed me and told me to count my time, but no weapon formed against me shall prosper is still my favorite line. Isaiah 54:17 always allows me a safe space to find a moment of peace, a moment of release, a moment to breathe. So I breathe and I breathe. I apply oil and light candles and try to forget your face. I turn on pink light crystals and undo every trace. I remember to forget you. I wash myself in the word. I pray, I talk to God. I know my cry he heard. If this is what they call healing, it is harder than I thought. It is not over the counter. It cannot be store-bought. When I finally walk away from everything hurting me, I will learn to press repeat. No, you will not win defeat. And yes, my lip bleeds. And yes, my face hurts. And yes, the bruises fade. But the roots are way worse of what you planted inside. But I won't water that anymore. I am still God's daughter, and he has far more in store. Thank you.
What Olivia doesn't tell you is there's also a poem in that book about waiting in line at domestic violence intake, which is my personal favorite poem in that book. It made me laugh. It's funny.
Jessica, you're not done. What is your reaction to Olivia's brave story? More specifically, what went right, what went wrong, and what do we need to change and improve for future survivors?
What I love about Olivia's story is that, so Olivia's story to me is a success story on a lot of levels because everything just went right. And it is extraordinarily rare, though, to have a situation like this where everything goes right. And I see Judge Siegel just nodding away at me because it is extremely rare that there is a victim who is able to leave and does find support. It is not rare that there is an interaction with a police department that is negative and horrible, but the second interaction with a police department was positive and wonderful. There was a restraining order granted both times. The defendant was arrested for his behavior. He was charged with the assault. He was charged with the stalking. He was charged with a contempt. He was indicted. He was convicted. He did spend time in jail. Olivia did get incredible victim advocacy services. She clearly has had a lot of really wonderful therapy that has brought her to this amazing place. And Olivia herself also happens to have a tremendous amount of inner fortitude and clearly has a lot of resources, both external and internal. So as far as I am concerned, this is just a tremendous, and I don't mean this like, Olivia knows, we go way back. But this is a wonderful success story, but fortunately for Olivia, Olivia's is a wonderful success story. Unfortunately, it is not the norm at all. There are so many victims who do not have the same experience at all. And Prosecutor Musella mentioned before the statistic that we've taken in 883 cases so far in the first 3 quarters of 2021. And I was mentioning to someone else in our office this morning who was shocked by how high that number was. And they said, you've taken in 883 cases? Like, how many other cases have gone back to the municipality? And I said, we've taken in 883 cases, and that number is probably underreported by a huge percentage. So that's why events like this are also so important, and why it's so important for people in the community to understand the resources that are out there and the places that people can go to get help, and what is available for other victims and people who might not even know that they are victims. That needing to be with you 24 hours a day, needing to know where you are and who you're with and what you're doing every minute of the day is not romantic love. It is not romantic love. It is isolation, it is controlling, it is not the Jessica show, and I'm going to stop talking.
Jessica, thank you. We're very fortunate in Bergen County to have Alternatives to Domestic Violence, which is a division of our county dedicated exclusively and solely to helping survivors get the help that they need. We're joined here today for the 3rd year in a row by the director, Ms. Susan DiGiacomo. Ms. DiGiacomo, in reaction to Olivia's story, could you speak to the importance of counseling and therapy for her recovery?
Well, one, Olivia, it's amazing that you got out of the relationship after 2 times. That is unusual, because we usually see a victim, a survivor, 5, 6, 7, 8 times before the relationship is actually over, if it is ever over. Because many times victims can't end a relationship, especially when there's children in common. What we have at ADV is crisis case management sessions, which is usually where we can begin to do intense safety planning, to identify the behaviors, the abusive behaviors, and here, love at first sight. One of the major warning signs is a relationship moving so quickly. Jealousy. Jealousy is not a sign of love. I classify it more as anger, I don't know, right? Dress, just taking and becoming an individual and making decisions for yourself. So crisis case management, when everything is in chaos, very vulnerable period of time, which you had, And then moving on to what we call as a psychoeducational program to learn what a healthy relationship looks like, equality in a relationship, respect, how to fairly negotiate and build up the self-esteem, because in one respect, I really wish we didn't call domestic violence, but domestic abuse, because it's all the emotional, verbal, blaming, degrading that eats away at you as a person, that all takes time to heal, to work through the trauma. And a lot of times what we see is a reaction of someone being very upset, out of control, can't really articulate. Those are all trauma responses. And that's not caused by you as a victim, that's the abuser. That's all the coercive behavior to take power and control over you and to instill fear. And he did that great.
Thank you, Susan. As part of her story, Olivia also told certain aspects of the response where things certainly didn't go well. And some of that response, which she encountered, where things did not go right, were from law enforcement. We're very fortunate each year that we're joined by the Bergen County Prosecutor. We're also fortunate that we're joined by the Bergen County Sheriff. So I'd like to ask Sheriff Curtin to please come up and share his reaction to Olivia's brave story.
Good evening, everyone. Yeah, I got lost on the way up here because I was taken back by her story, Olivia's story. What's interesting, what words can you have that can respond to that other than, I'm sorry you had to go through what you went through. I'm sorry for the officers and their conduct. But I'm happy that you took the initiative to come up here and tell your story, because your story can help someone else, which I'm pretty sure those in the crowd, those who are watching it, you've touched somebody's life, and trust me, I'm pretty sure someone is coming forth and very appreciative of the words you've just said. In 32 years of law enforcement, I've encountered several cases of domestic violence, serving as an officer, as well as witnessing and speaking with victims or abusers from the time I worked in the jail. And here's some of the excuses they've said on why they may have abused their victim was just something that it was just hard to really understand. One gentleman who unfortunately took his wife's life, the only explanation he had was his jealousy of her having a boyfriend. And having that conversation with him, he can never give me any understanding on why would he do that. And my words to him was, I said, I don't want you to incriminate yourself, but why not leave? If she doesn't want you, why not leave? And his response still mesmerized me. We have kids together. I said, okay, but why not leave? Kids together is not defining or truly defining of a relationship, especially when there's violence involved. So I came with a whole nother different speech. But after hearing your story, it's like, okay, I had to deviate a little bit. Like I said, in my time, I've seen many victims of domestic violence, and being a father of two daughters, I wonder if they have to experience that. And I constantly reinforce with them of how to respond and let them know love is not found There is no love at the end of a fist. There is no love when words are belittling. Walk away. And that's a challenge because I realize we all get our hearts involved. But for me personally, I try to convey that. And I ask them to share their story with their friends. Again, it's kind of hard to follow. But my hearts and prayers go out to every victim who have to be subjected to an abuser. But also, like, let no weapon form against you shall prosper. Let no man who try to overtake you shall prosper. And my prayers goes out with you. On the professional side, if any of my officers ever made such a comment like that, long as it was within my powers, they will pay dearly. So thank you. Again, thank you for your story. Thank you for everyone's story. God's blessing, Godspeed with you.
Thank you, Sheriff. We're also joined again this year by George Herrera. George Herrera is a lieutenant with the New Milford Police Department. He has many years of experience, both as an officer and reacting to domestic violence calls. So, Lieutenant, I ask you the same difficult question that I asked the sheriff. What was your reaction to hearing Olivia's story? And what do you believe could be improved with respect to officer training in the future so it doesn't happen again?
Well, you hit on it right there, Matt. It's training. It's supervision and making sure that a supervisor doesn't allow for an officer or a detective, a sergeant, any of his subordinates to sit there and say, "You again." I mean, who would say that? Or to say, "Are you trying to get murdered?" Olivia said that she didn't feel safe and that she didn't want to go back. So the whole reason the department that she went to, they were there to protect her, to make her feel safe. But those two comments, the ones that she stated, there may have been more, and those two are awful on their own right. But those two right there just minimize what that department was actually there for. And if there was an officer within earshot of that, they should have stepped in. And that detective should have been immediately removed from that situation. We're not here to victimize the victim. I was taught that a long time ago. And I've had officers on scenes say, "Well, why are we doing it that way?" Well, because we are not here to victimize the victim. They are a victim, and we are going to treat them accordingly. We are going to show compassion. We are going to show empathy. We are going to give them resources, the resources that they need so we can break this cycle, do our best to break this cycle. I was taken aback by that. Olivia, you made me take notes. I mean, that right there. So training, supervision, officers understanding the situation that they are in, and not to embarrass, not to belittle the victim, but to show that victim support and to make sure the one part that Jessica touched on was the fact that the person was charged, okay? So she was not failed all the way around because that person was charged and with some pretty hefty charges. So that I was happy to hear. But that other little bit that was in there was not. But that's how you fix that, Matt. That's how you fix that.
Just as a follow-up, George, how can the police support survivors? It's no secret that in many cases, a police officer is the first person to respond to a call. What can the police do to help the survivors get the help they need, particularly in the acute crisis that necessitates the call?
Well, we have ADV that Sue is here right now. We actually have CITs that we will call out, okay, if they need additional support. Also on the victim notification form, which is what they get when they apply for a restraining order, there are all of the resources that they can follow up with if they need to.
Please. Just for a moment, just want to introduce you. This is Allison Bressler, who is with the Partnership for Change. who is joining us this year for the first time. Welcome.
Hi, my name is Allison Bressler, as Matt said. I'm the co-founder of a Partnership for Change, and we train all over the state of New Jersey on domestic violence and dating abuse, and we have programs all over the place. One of the programs that we actually have is called our PREP program. It's our Police Response Enhancement Program. We've actually had many, many officers from the Bergen County Sheriff's Department attend them as well. In 2010, my fellow co-founder and I decided to develop this program because what we knew from working with the many victim survivors that we've worked with over the years is that sometimes officers can become desensitized to victimization, excuse me, if they have to go back to the same home over and over again. And you know, what we have learned from the officers that we've worked with, that it's actually a feeling of helplessness that parlays itself into frustration that sometimes re-victimizes the victim. And so we developed these series of classes designed to teach officers what the impact is on victimization. And we developed these programs so that they learned differently, they did differently, and they responded differently. And that's the beauty part of the program. We've actually trained over 3,000 officers at this point. And what we do is we teach them not just what it feels like to be victimized from certain perspectives, but really what they need to understand as to how to speak to somebody who's been victimized, how to respond to them effectively. We talk to them about those victim, what is it, the victim sheet that you had said that they hand somebody when they go on a domestic call. And we talk to them about, don't just hand them resources, get to know the resources, because somebody is more likely to reach out for support when they understand what those resources are. We utilize those DVRTs and the CRTs and CIT programs so that they understand these are people who are trained that can support them. So we really have been working with officers throughout the entire state. Unfortunately, due to COVID, because we were in the Bergen County Law and Public Safety Institute, and we were in Union County and Middlesex and Monmouth and Summit, and of course COVID. But the beautiful part of having to be moved to webinars is officers from literally all over the state can attend our classes. So for any officers, we always welcome you to register. You could just go on our website and do that. Thank you.
I am going to ask, and I apologize because I got lost there for a moment. Can somebody please explain these terms and acronyms, CIT, and these other terms, please? Susan?
DVRT is Domestic Violence Crisis Response Team. CIT is Crisis Intervention Team. Both are basically the same, just different acronyms for them. ADV actually supervises the DVRT teams here in Bergen County. And right now, all during COVID, we did meet with and serve victims telephonically, and our staff was actually the dispatchers that worked with the victims. So that really worked out well because safety planning during COVID was much different than safety planning prior to COVID.
Thank you, Susan. I'm going to turn for a moment to you, Kate. We're joined again this year by Catherine Miller, who's a senior staff attorney at Center for Hope and Safety, which was once upon a time known as Shelter Our Sisters. Kate's our senior staff attorney, and she takes these cases to court, to the family court, to apply for final restraining orders, as well as other relief and needed help for survivors of abuse and domestic violence. Kate, what was your reaction to Olivia's story, and more specifically, as with the other panelists, what do you think needs to be improved and changed?
Well, again, Olivia, just to echo everything, you're so strong, and thank you so much for sharing that story. I think just hearing her story, and particularly the poem that Jessica had alluded to, talking to domestic violence intake, is that even as service providers, we all just need to remember to be kind and patient to these survivors, because to do what Olivia just did and tell her story in front of everyone takes so much strength. And when she reaches out to law enforcement, to attorneys, to sitting in a domestic violence intake thing, it just takes so much that I think that every provider just needs to remember that to you, it may be a job and a passion, but you are dealing with someone who is going through a crisis and who is going through their worst time. So you should always make sure to give them your best time so that it can be as helpful for the client as possible.
Thank you, Kate. We're joined again this year by retired Superior Court Judge Ronnie Jo Siegel. Judge Siegel, while she served in the Superior Court in Bergen County, heard domestic violence cases. Judge Siegel, it was her decision whether to grant or deny the application for a final restraining order. So oftentimes, when a survivor comes forward and they begin with law enforcement and the case becomes initiated and then proceeds through the attorneys, including Kate, that case can end up not just with the prosecutor's office, with a concurrent criminal track, but also in the family court before a judge such as Judge Siegel. Judge, what advice would you have for someone such as Olivia in preparing to take their case to court to get the restraining order that they need for their own safety and protection?
In response to Jessica's numbers, some 800 people do a filing. In Bergen County so far, 1,800 have filed in 2021, and they expect another 600 because we see maybe 200 every month. And it's against that background that I speak to you today. 1 out of 4 women, 1 out of 10 men, 1 out of 4 young people. Those are statistics. I heard a wonderful quote. It was, "Behind every statistic is a beating heart," and that has resonated with me. So what I think the courts have tried to do is be responsive to the difficult situation and rising situation we have with domestic violence. With COVID, the courts were closed. What did we do? We ended up doing something that we've now implemented on a regular basis and added to the ways that we handle criminal complaints, domestic violence complaints. Now, just by calling in and speaking with a hearing officer, a person can file for a domestic violence restraining order. That is a wonderful opportunity then, in the safety of the home or in a safe place without the presence of a perpetrator, of a defendant. You can speak with a hearing officer or a police officer and they can take down your complaint. It avoids the difficulty it may be to get to the municipality or to get to the courthouse, although those 2 ways are available to you. But I would note that at every opportunity, there's an effort to try to make a victim of domestic violence feel comfortable. We have a special room at the courthouse. ADV assists us. They're there to give advice and counseling to every victim. Our courtrooms now only permit some 8 people in the courtroom where they hear domestic violence complaints. Defendants are separated from the plaintiffs. I thought a lot about what I could advise to people that are filing for restraining orders and are seeking a final restraining order. I want you to know that counsel is available to you for free. Alternatives to Domestic Violence, Northeast Legal Services, they offer attorneys for you. Some people don't want it. The Ombudsman and NewJerseyCourts.com offer you a pamphlet on how to proceed as a self-represented litigant, but I want you to know that you have available to you attorneys that will represent you, and if successful, the defendant is obligated to pay your fees. What do you do to prepare? Be careful and make sure that you include not only the facts of that case, but any prior history, which could be extensive, not only criminal acts or domestic violence acts, but a myriad of acts as elicited by Jessica, where it's efforts to exert control, acts of denigration, anything that could be supportive of your complaint. You can call witnesses, bring in medical tests, bring in that 911 tape, all sorts of things with an attorney to help you or ADV to help you. You can proceed seeking a final restraining order. Remember that relief that you're asking for. not only will you automatically be able to secure your safety by not having that defendant be able to have contact with you, but think about your children and whether or not you wish to secure their safety from that person, or whether there has to be supervised parenting time. I would say to you, there's, at every step of the way, think very carefully about the relief that you want. Know that the courts are there for you with a myriad of groups that will help you and assist you. So don't hesitate. I want you to know that the courts are there for you.
Thank you, Judge Siegel. We're joined again this year by Lil Corcoran, who's the Executive Director of the Women's Rights Information Center. And Lil, your passion, as well as one of your many specialties, is speaking about the impact of the trauma, the mental impact. So I would like you to please speak to the trauma which Olivia suffered and what therapy or counseling she should seek, and whether or not trauma can actually give rise to post-traumatic stress disorder. So I'm going to turn it to you, Lil.
Thanks, Matt. I want to just say, Olivia, thank you for sharing your story. I think that takes a lot of bravery to come out and tell a story like that. I want to comment on the story in general, that a couple of people on the panel mentioned that that the case went very well. And I want us to take a second and think about what that means. This is a woman who had to go several times for relief, was continually being abused while she was, and that's considered as I don't know how to say it, a good case. And that's kind of, you know, I've been doing this for over 30 years, unfortunately, and that's kind of depressing to me, that someone would still have to go through that process and not get the response initially that you needed, and eventually did get it. It was one of our success cases, right? Now, I also want the victims that might be, or survivors that might be listening to this tonight to know that if it didn't go so swimmingly well for you, you're not alone, because it's a hard process. It's really hard. And I also want to mention too that just because someone gets a restraining order doesn't make them necessarily safer, right? It's like a seatbelt might give you some extra protection in a car, but you can still be injured in a car accident. So it's not a panacea. So one of the things I want to make sure we say is, when we say that this case went well, is we want to really protect victims. We need to let them know what the risks are, even when they go to the police department, even when they have an attorney, even when they get a restraining order. And that's why I think safety planning is something that has to happen from the moment, whether you stay with the abuser, whether you leave the abuser, and every day after you leave the abuser, because they come back. That's the sad fact of it. Abusers come back. They don't just go, oh, okay, sorry about that, see you later. In fact, sometimes the only time you can get rid of them is when they move on to their next victim, right? So now we have another victim out there, right? So Matt, I know I kind of went on a soapbox there, and actually now that I said that, I recently had a victim tell me that when they went to the police station in another town, because it would never happen in New Milford, the police officer behind the desk said, oh, so now you're getting on your soapbox. And this was literally about 2 or 3 weeks after the Petito story, which you would have thought there'd be a heightened sensitivity to what's going on. Well, yeah, I'm on my soapbox because I want you to keep me from getting killed. How about that, right? So my worry for you, George, and the rest of your law enforcement folks out here is you may be getting, if people are watching this, you may get a lot of calls tonight saying, how can I get help with some of the response from some of the police departments that weren't so trained? And I also think that has a lot to do with, I think we need a universal response to domestic violence. We still haven't been able to kind of nail that down. Like, we all ought to, it ought to be part of the kitchen table discussion what the universal response is to someone who's being abused. We don't have that. We have good training, as we heard from some of the panelists. We have good police officers. We have good judges. But it's not universal yet. It hasn't sunk deep enough into our social fabric so that we all have a very consistent response when victims and survivors come forward. That said, let me tell you about trauma and mental health in general. I want to tell you something about mental health that I think is really important. We're all on the continuum of mental health. From one end of the continuum of being like completely, you don't have any emotional issues, no psychological issues, you had a perfect childhood, you had a perfect life, everything is wonderful, okay? please let me know if you fit that category, but that's this end of the continuum, right? To completely psychotic, out of control, mentally ill, no grounding in basis. Now, I'm giving you the two extremes, right? I do not believe anyone sitting in this room tonight is on either end of that extreme. We're somewhere in the middle, right? And it's not static usually. It's usually, it ebbs and flows. So hopefully most of you are kind of down at this end of that mental health continuum, and you have a little bit of neurosis, you're kind of neurotic like I am, but you're in this direction, and then you kind of move in that direction, hopefully. And when you start tipping up this way, then maybe you go see your therapist, right? But we're all on it. We're all on it. So when I hear people say that domestic violence has to do with mental illness or mental health, it makes me crazy, because it is not about mental health. Domestic violence is about power and control. It's about dominance. And here's how you know kind of the difference. Most mentally ill people are not violent. I know we don't know that because what gets sensationalized are those stories, right? Most mentally ill people are not violent. And if they were, we'd all be in trouble, right? And there are many people who use abuse as a tactic and are not diagnosable with a mental illness. And here's how you know. Someone who uses violence, if they're using violence because of their mental health condition, they're not discriminate about it. They're the person who you do hear pushes someone in front of a train, a stranger, right? Their mental health is impacting them. Most batterers are not pushing people in front of trains. They know where they can get away with their abuse and their violence and their bullying and where they can't get away with it. That's not about mental illness. That's about, well, there actually is a little mental illness there. It's called narcissistic personality disorder. They're a little further up here on the mental health continuum, right, to this side. But most, so now we know mental health because we're all on the continuum. Of course it has a part to play in it, whether we're in an abusive situation or whether we're trying to get out of it, but it doesn't cause it. It might be an exacerbating factor. And I also want to tell you, while I have the mic, we just recently got a Department of Justice, Office of Attorney General in New Jersey gave us a grant to provide short-term trauma therapy in 3 modalities. To my knowledge, it hasn't been done in New Jersey. I'm very excited about this. We're almost ramped up and ready to go, where we can give someone who's been a victim 6 sessions of either equine therapy or art therapy or something called EMDR, which is eye movement desensitization and reprocessing. That's a mouthful, so EMDR. And so all of these treatments are short-term because what we're trying to do is take the trauma response that we're having, and which is also now coupled with COVID, because we're all in trauma about that too, but to sort of ameliorate the trauma response. This is not long-term therapy. There's been evidence that shows, these are evidence-based treatment modalities that show short-term treatments in these modalities can reduce trauma symptoms. So, and then of course with that program, we're able to also offer a longer-term, this is not a replacement for long-term counseling or therapy or your groups with ADV or other mental health professionals. So we do have an opportunity here to provide something that can help. And there's almost no way that you've been abused and you're not suffering from some kind of trauma. You may not know it, but you've got it. I feel like I've got trauma just living through the COVID days, I call them, you know. So anyway, I'm sure you'll call on me again, Matt, and I can say some more, but.
Of course
Did
I
I
will.
answer your question? I
Yes.
know I go off on spiral.
Yes, you did, and thank you. And we're gonna, yes, please, Kathy.
Thanks, Lil. Lil gave me my first job, by the way. Okay, so specific trauma symptoms I wanted to touch on because so often survivors are not considered credible reporters. And that really is directly linked to the trauma. So if they are frozen or they are unable to be consistent in their reporting to an officer or even in the court, there are reasons for that, and I want to just highlight those. Again, these are the effects of trauma known as traumatic stress, or they could be further carried into the diagnosis of post-traumatic stress disorder. And this is taken from the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual, which is sort of the guidebook for psychological diagnoses. Again, these are the impacts of trauma. Inability to remember details of an abusive episode, one single abusive episode, not to mention multiple abusive episodes, is a symptom of a type of amnesia, the brain's response to feeling overwhelmed by a threat to self and thinking processes. And it partially will shut down for self-protection. So many survivors are made to feel there is something wrong with them by their abusers, or even possibly by their family, friends, officers, anyone they reach out to. The symptoms can contribute to anxiety, depression, suicidality, post-traumatic stress, and sleep disorders. Thinking processes can get hijacked by repeated and distorted negative thoughts, including self-blame about the cause or the outcomes of the abuse incident. Feelings that no one can be trusted, if family or police don't support the survivor, and these thoughts are often accompanied by crippling fear, anger, guilt, horror, and shame. Slowly detaching from family, social relationships, agencies, or members of the legal system further cripples a person's sense of hopefulness, happiness, or satisfaction with living. Additional symptoms of traumatic stress include problems with mental focus and concentration, nightmares, other sleep pattern disruptions, exaggerated startle responses, irritability, or angry reactivity, again indicating that the emotions are overwhelmed. So these are the normal responses to trauma. They are misunderstood. They are diminished. And I think it's important for survivors to recognize that these are the normal responses of trauma, and for everyone to also consider these. Thank you.
Yes, yes, Judge.
I know that sometimes victims feel that they're not as credible or effective in telling their story. And I want you to know that the courts and the judges are required on an annual basis to take specific training to include, one, appreciation of that instance, and in addition to be mindful of the effect of domestic violence on the children who are truly the innocent victims of what is happening between their parents. So again, we try to train our judges, and the judges are trained to be mindful of those two important aspects of this problem.
Judge, thank you. In a moment, we're going to transition to another survivor's story. But before we do so, I'm going to bring it back to Allison Bressler. For this reason, one of you raised the issue before, Ms. Corcoran, I think you did, about your reference Gabby Petito. In light of Gabby Petito, and in addition, in getting feedback from local colleges and universities about issues that are concerning to young students of college age, and more specifically, getting questions and suggested topics from Ramapo College. An issue of very serious concern is dating violence. The context in which people are obviously not married, don't yet have children in common, and not only may not be living together, they may in fact still be living in their home of origin with their families, but they're dating. Ms. Bressler, I'm going to ask you to address both the issue of dating violence, but also what do you believe law enforcement may have missed in the Gabby Petito case?
Are you willing to stay here till midnight? We're good? Okay. Okay, so here's the thing. I'll take the second part first. And this is the best that I can tell you. You have a situation where you have a young, pretty, white woman who is in significant distress. You have a very calm and collected young man who is explaining away what actually happened in his perception or whatever he needs to tell the police. She comes off hysterical. She blames herself. She diagnoses herself with OCD. And again, you have officers who, in my opinion, clearly were not trained on what the warning signs are, what to look for, how somebody who's been victimized may respond. She's scared, she's young, she's far away from her family, obviously, and it is clear and obvious that this has been a cycle that has been going on in this relationship. And so he presents better, which happens so incredibly often in so many of these domestic violence and partner violence cases. You have somebody who presents well, who can articulate what is actually what they want the police to know, what they believe is going on. They stay calm, they're collected, and the person who's being victimized looks completely crazy. And so as not to upset either or, what those officers did was they separated, they put him in a nice little hotel room, and they let her go. They let her go without resources, they let her go without safety planning, they let her go without contacting her family, they let her go. And they let him go to a hotel for the evening. And I have to tell you, worst case scenario, some people agree, some people disagree, I would have even rathered let them arrest her. That's really how I felt. Let them arrest her if they felt that she was the perpetrator, because at least she would be alive. What's that? Lil disagrees. I would have rather them take her away from the scenario because they didn't have the training, Lil. They didn't have the training to know what to do. They had to do something, right? They should have done something. But to separate her and send her on her way just puts her in greater danger. And that's exactly what happened. So in my opinion, Lil, you're saying you disagree. You can jump on and then I'll talk about the teens.
So I just want to say that, at least in New Jersey, again, we're talking about a different state.
Right.
In New Jersey, there would have been a mandatory arrest.
Yes.
And the chances are pretty good in New Jersey she would have been arrested because, as I recall, Laundrie had a mark on him or something. And I'm challenging the police to stop arresting victims because they fought back. We're not ragdolls. We're not going to stand there while somebody's beating us up and not try to scratch or hit and push back.
I agree with you
And
absolutely.
so, hang on,
completely.
I'm not done, my friend. I love you. I think that I would like to see the police, though, do investigation, understand what these dynamics are, and then I think they should have arrested him. Because to me, as soon as I saw that video, I'm like, oh my God, this is DV 101. DV 101. It's exactly what happens. Every case you have, I'm telling you, this is exactly what happens. And this guy, and the police did drop the ball in that case. They should have arrested him because once they did the investigation and found out why he had scratch marks, because he was harassing her and hitting her or whatever he was doing, they should have arrested him. That's what I think should have happened.
I agree with you 110%. I'm going from the perspective of they weren't trained. They didn't know what they were doing. They were walking into a scene where they actually thought she was the perpetrator. You know what? If you're not trained and you don't know what you're doing, take her in. That would at least kept her safe. And then there, they could have really, if they had known better, figured out that she was the person who was being victimized and that he was the perpetrator.
This is your fireworks moment, Matt. I'm going to get into a debate with you right now. I
We're
just got
gonna
to tell you.
debate it. But I
Here,
agree.
So I got to just say this. I've been doing this too long. I worked in a shelter and I saw women get arrested all the time. And guess what? They sat their asses in jail. And when male batterers did it, half the time they were out of jail, they were bailed out or didn't even go to jail. So I'm very concerned about victims getting arrested.
I agree.
They sit in jail and the real batterer is walking around laughing at them. See, I told you. We are aligning ourselves with the batterer when we arrest victims, and it happens all the time.
I completely 100% agree. I'm only speaking to the situation at hand. They weren't trained. They didn't know what they were doing. So if they didn't know what they were doing, absolutely never want the victim arrested. The victim shouldn't be arrested. Officers should be trained on how to respond effectively, what to look for, to realize and notice that he was the calm, collected one, explaining it away, and she was the one that was half hysterical, blaming herself for everything. Clearly, those are the signs that they missed. So instead, what did they do? They did nothing. They did absolutely nothing. And my perspective was, if you absolutely don't have a clue, take someone in. If you're saying right there and then that you're the perpetrator, they were incorrect, I agree. And absolutely, she never should have been, a victim should never be arrested. I completely agree with that. But right there and then, in that moment, take one of them in. And if you think she's the perpetrator, take her in. Maybe you would have saved her life. Everything they did was wrong. Everything they did was wrong. Anything else, Lil, before I go into teens? Okay. All right. So let me just talk a moment about another pandemic is teen dating abuse and teen violence that's going on. One of the programs that a Partnership for Change runs is called Power Back, and it's a teen peer leadership program. We've been in over 40 different schools throughout the state. We teach teens not just how to advocate and understand the issue and how to support someone, but how to refer appropriately. And we've been in a bunch of schools in Bergen County, in Union County, in Middlesex County. We've been all over the place. And we've spoken to over 19,000 students. And when I tell you we've spoken to over 19,000 students, we literally put them in an auditorium. We usually put females or whoever identifies female in the auditorium. We put the males in the gym, and we speak to them for an hour and a half. And we do a real solid teen dating abuse 101 with them. And then at the end of these forums, we have them do a confidential survey. And the information that we receive is jarring. And I have to tell you, I'm just going to read you off some of the statistics. Over 19,000 students, I want you to know that 26% of the girls and 18% of the boys report being verbally and emotionally abused by their partner. When they come into the forum, we'll ask them, how many of you believe that either you or someone you know has been abused in a relationship? And we'll get a smattering of hands. By the end of the forum, they are shocked, they're dismayed, they're standing up to talk to us, they're getting in line to disclose to us because our teens are not understanding. I have to say, we have to start young. We have to start young. We have to get to these kids young so that they understand what these warning signs are, so that they understand how to not get into these relationships before they're emotionally invested, how to understand that jealousy and possessiveness are not yummy and loving, that those are negatives, that those are your two first red flags that it's going to be abusive. So we teach these kids. We found that 13% of the girls, 19,000, we've spoken to probably more girls than we have boys. We're at over 13,000 girls. 13% of those girls acknowledge that they're pressured and coerced and scared, so they have sex. We've been in every school district you can imagine, from the lowest socioeconomic to the highest socioeconomic to the middle class to every kind of area you can imagine. Our numbers are the same. And the most jarring number of those 19,000 are 24% of them. 24% at the end of these forums are acknowledging that they're going home to abuse in their family, that they're exposed to it with their families, with their seeing one partner do this to another partner. And we know that there's a 50% higher likelihood that you will be perpetrating or be victimized as you get older if you've been exposed. So we have so much work to do with our young people to help educate them and teach them. I have to tell you, I work as an expert witness on some cases, and I'll never forget an interaction I had with a judge who was a lovely man, and when I was done testifying and the case was over, I said, make sure you talk to your daughter. He said he had a teen daughter. And he said, I don't have to, she tells me everything. And I went, oy vey, all right. Because my response was, no, I don't care how close you are. I say this respectfully, but I don't care how close you are with your child. This is the one topic they're not coming home and telling you about because it's their intimate life. And they don't want to share that. It's weird, it's uncomfortable. They're scared of mom or dad's reaction. They're scared of, being told you have to break up, which is what parents tend to say. Get out of it now, which is like saying, no, get pregnant and run away with this person immediately. Because kids will do the opposite oftentimes. So we do have a lot of work within the high schools. So we can stop them when they're 35 and 40 years old with 3 children thinking they can never get out of it again, that they're stuck. Okay, I'm done.
Thank you, Allison.
Can I say something really quick about the Gabby Petito case too?
Yes, please.
What I wish the police would have done is that they would have reached out to a safe house like my organization offers, or offered her not just a hotel, but just call a hotline and do like a hard referral, like so many of the police officers do, where they're like, call the safe house, even if you just go there for a night, just so that then they can get the safety planning and services that they need.
Thank you, Kate. I'm going to just follow up with Lieutenant Herrero. Lieutenant, how can we train police officers to more accurately identify who is the perpetrator and who is the victim in a domestic case?
That's what their supervisors are for. These officers, I would imagine, didn't call their supervisors out to see if they should have acted further. I haven't seen the complete video. But in a lot of cases, if you don't have the proper supervision, then something might get through the cracks. I can tell you that I've walked onto scenes as a patrolman I've walked onto scenes as a sergeant, I've walked onto scenes as a lieutenant. And I've seen some chaotic scenes where everybody's hurt, everybody's bleeding, and it's on us to figure out who the victim is. I want to watch the video now because I want to see where they failed her, because it's a shame that they did and that she's no longer with us. The only thing I can say is if an officer is unsure, that's why they have supervisors.
This question, before I know we're going to be transitioning to another story in a moment, but I want to ask, yes. Is your
It's
mic? Okay.
also, when we're talking about teens and young people, it is so important for parents not to deny and to be open. There's such a stigma that children need to be able to talk about this and not either with their teachers, with their parents. And parents also need to see these warning signs. You know, it's all too often that a relationship where their teenage daughter or their teenage son, there's constant involvement, constant texting. These are all warning signs that even as parents, we need to speak to our children. This has to be a coordinated response from the home, from school, from offices, from society. It's just, you can't just leave it there.
And I'm just jumping in. And I think that parents also need to remember, particularly in this era of sexting and everything, that it is not the girl's fault for sharing the pictures, it's the boy's fault for threatening to post all of those pictures. And that parents, if they hear about this, shouldn't say to their daughters, you know, how could you do this? Why are you so stupid? It's not, just as I had said before, just go at it with just a place of kindness and just know that, you know, you have to support your child in this time. Okay, now go on.
Can I just say one more thing? I'm sorry.
That's okay.
Just really quick. I told you can be here till midnight. This is the thing. It's very hard for any parent to discern what is going on with their child in their personal life. Listen, I can only talk about my teen. I would want to come with kindness. I'd also want to kill someone, right? So I think it's really important, if you are aware of what those signs are early, the signs are this, because it's hard with kids, their phones are like another appendage, right? They walk around with them 24/7. So the texting is constant. But the things like, I'm telling you to put your phone down, but I need to respond to that. I'm telling you to put your phone down, and you see a real negative reaction. You see them get angry. The person who's being victimized, I have to get back to this person. I have to talk to them. I've had parents who, because I'm also a therapist as well, I have a practice in Bergen, in Westwood. I've had parents say, I could hear my child fight their partner screaming and yelling at them from the hallway. These are the things you want to look for. The distress, if they can't meet them. The change in the dress. They might have been somebody who dressed in a certain way, but now that dress is completely different. They're dropping out of clubs. They're not hanging out with their friends anymore. These are the things that you want to look for. If you say to them, I'm concerned about your relationship, and they have a real major reaction, these are all red flags that something might be going on. And this is where you open the conversation with open-ended questions. How does your partner show you they love you? How does your partner show you they don't love you? And that's how you start the conversation. What the studies show, the best way to reach your child, don't make eye contact. Don't make eye contact with them. Watch TV, drive in a car, make a salad, something like that. And it takes the pressure off them. They tend to open up and talk more. That's it, I'm done.
Thank you. To that point, since you brought up young adults, one particularly concerning subject that was brought up by an area college student from Ramapo was this. And I'm actually going to direct this to Krista Madler, who is back with us for the third year, thank you, from the New Jersey Division of Child Protection and Permanency. And the question was this. For a young person who lives at home, and that person is still a minor. Perhaps they're in high school or even younger than high school. And that person is witnessing domestic violence and abuse from one parent to another parent. But they're afraid to call your office. They're afraid to go to their school principal, their teacher, or their school administrator because they're afraid of being placed in foster care or being removed from their family. Would you please speak to that issue and the role of your division?
Sure. Good evening, everyone. Thank you, Matt, for asking me to be on this distinguished panel. I work for the Division of Child Protection and Permanency. We are the state child welfare system. Here in Bergen County, we have 2 offices, the Bergen South local office in Hackensack and the Bergen Central local office in Paramus. We handle many referrals that come through our hotline, 1-877-NJ-ABUSE. Anyone who has knowledge of a child being abused or neglected is mandated to report. And the calls get fielded to one of our 2 local offices here in Bergen County. We do get many referrals specifically regarding families who are experiencing family violence, as well as calls for many other reasons. And while we are assessing that family, we find that domestic violence is one of maybe the many stressors going on in that home. So just to speak to what you specifically asked, Matt, we do have a bad rap of removing children, right? People don't realize that actually here in Bergen County, we have 1,400 active children that we're working with, and only 80 are in out-of-home placement. So at this point in time, 96% of the children that we're servicing are being serviced within their own homes. And that's always our goal, is to keep children safe in their homes. And having worked in child welfare for over 20 years, it's been a privilege to really see how the child welfare field, particularly here in New Jersey, has evolved in how we respond to cases of domestic violence within a family. What we really do is take a victim-centered approach, and we have learned that if we can keep the domestic violence victim safe, then the children therefore will also be safe. We are very lucky here in the state of New Jersey. Every local office, I should say every county, has a partnership with a domestic violence agency in their county. And here in Bergen County, our partnership is with the Center for Hope and Safety. And both of our offices here in Bergen County have a domestic violence liaison who actually sits in our local office and is able to assist our staff in making appropriate assessments, making sure that we are helping the family safety plan, helping the victim safety plan, and therefore then our staff can ensure that the child is safe as well. So we would encourage, a child who is, old enough, obviously, to be aware and wants to come forward to go forward and speak to someone they trust. Our goal is always to make sure that they're safe and to support the family and do our best. We will leave no stone unturned trying to keep that child with their family.
Thank you, Ms. Madler. We're also joined, once again, we're very fortunate to be joined by Samaza Sadik. Samaza Sadik is the Executive Director of Healing Space. And I'm going to, of course, ask you to introduce yourself more fully, but my question for you is simply, does sexual violence play a role in a domestic violent relationship? And if so, what is that role?
Sure, thank you, Matthew. So I am the director of YWCA Northern New Jersey Healing Space, and we are the Bergen County's lead sexual violence agency. So when we think about sexual violence and rape, and sexual assault, there's a myth that dominates our thinking and perceptions about what real rape actually is and what it's considered. And the popular misconception was that rape was perpetrated exclusively by strangers, and this concept of stranger danger that we see on television, somebody jumps out of the bushes, they're lurking, and they attack you, and that's you're a victim survivor of rape. What that thinking does is it doesn't allow for a discussion or recognition of sexual violence that occurs between two people who know each other. And it doesn't acknowledge those from various gender identities who can both be perpetrators and they can victimize. So what we also know is more often than not, sexual violence occurs among people who know each other and usually in a place that the survivor is familiar with and safe to them, such as their home. The intersection of domestic violence and sexual violence it's a crime that hinders someone's ability to access the full spectrum of their human rights. And the majority of those who are physically assaulted by an intimate partner have also been sexually assaulted. And sexual violence is not an isolated incident on its own. It oftentimes is coupled with domestic violence. It's in dating relationships. And it happens along other forms of abuse. So there's physical abuse, emotional abuse, financial, psychological abuse, and then coupled with sexual abuse. And they all start with controlling behaviors, and it escalates further into the physical and sexual abuse. I hope that answered your question.
It did, thank you. As I mentioned earlier, the true heroes are the survivors who have the courage to come forward and share their stories with all of you and also with all of us. I'm going to turn it to Ms. Corcoran to introduce your survivor.
Well, I mean, I'm just going to ask you to come up and Regina, and I'm glad you're here. And again, I just want to say it takes a lot of courage to get up and be willing to share your story. And one of the things that Regina did tell me when she was planning to do this is that she wanted to, give the message to other survivors that may be out there who maybe think they're alone, very similar to what we heard from Olivia before. So thank you for being willing to do this. I'm literally from here, I have your back.
Thank you. This is actually awkward because I'm not looking at anyone back there, but hello. So I actually feel, I was late today, but I feel kind of fortunate, like it was meant to be, because everything that I just heard helped me pinpoint more things. Everything that we want to say is just there's so much that has happened. I was with my ex-husband for 16 years. I met him when I was 17, he was 20, and I met him and I moved in with him a couple months later. I was fleeing an abusive household, and that was my escape. My mother signed me out of school, so I didn't go to 12th grade, and that was it. And so when you spoke about, younger people seeing the abuse in the household, it's major. I mean, it's their foundation. And so from, fleeing the abusive household, I was bred to believe that I was inferior. And so that was my thought process. And so then I left, and now I was stuck in another abusive home. He is still a drug addict, and I had nowhere to go. So when I moved in with him, after some time, that's what I became. And so this happened for years. Then I had I was pregnant with my daughter when, obviously I stopped doing drugs. And that's when it got physical, because I started calling him out on the fact that he was leaving all the time, the fact that he was using all the money for women and for drugs. And so then it became physical, where he would push me and things like that, because I was speaking up. It didn't matter that I was pregnant, I was speaking up. And there's just so much to say. I wish I heard the other survivor. So after some time, after some time, years of being pushed around, being verbally, emotionally abused, sorry. I just have to breathe. After some time of him doing the same thing over and over, using the money for drugs, I'm frozen. Using money for drugs, women cheating on me, and pushing me around. I had nowhere to go, and I thought revenge would be, I thought all I had was revenge, so I want to speak out about this. This is why I'm mentioning this. So I cheated once, and I got pregnant, and I felt like I did something wrong, which I did, but ever since that, and I had my son be adopted so he can have a mother and a father, and then my daughter, who I already had, can have a mother and a father. I thought I forgave myself, but I stayed with him. And it got worse. Now he was pushing me down constantly, just striking me constantly. It became my life, and I stayed because I had done something wrong now. So now I felt I deserved it. So I stayed with him. And then I had another son with him. And throughout that pregnancy, I was being physically abused as well. And I want to speak to what I was hearing in regards to how long it can take some women to say something, men, to say something. I went for multiple TROs. I went for 3 TROs, 3 temporary restraining orders. And after the first time I went, I noticed a difference as well. I noticed I wasn't being taken seriously because I had settled for civil restraints. And each time I thought it would get better, and so he would come back into the home. But, sorry. Then in 2020, when he got physical with my little nephew and my sister, that I guess I didn't really. Then he got physical with them, and that's when I finally decided to do the final restraining order. And previous to that, I felt I had nobody. But when I did the final restraining order, and I really meant it this time, and the judge believed me, and I didn't think he would, and he believed me. And then I found Women's Rights Information Center, and now I can support my kids. And there's so much more to say in between that. I don't know how much time I can take up. And I found wonderful people at Project Child and wonderful people at Family Promise. There's help for rent. There's help for therapy. They pay for it. There's help for food. There's help for everything. There's help for school. You can do anything. I feel like I have a team behind me now, and I'm only standing here, and I only have confidence in myself. It wasn't because I came from good parents. It wasn't from I didn't come from a great foundation. But I have a great one now, and I'm able to build it. I'm able to make it for my kids. And they went through a lot. And I felt like I was staying a little bit because of my kids, and I think that's so silly. I can stand here now, and I can support my kids, and I have a team behind me because I chose to leave. I chose to do the final restraining order. And even with the final restraining order, they don't stay away. He tried multiple times. He would bang on the door. He would do anything to try and get to me. But when I called, he would go to court. We didn't have to, as the victim, you don't have to go to court after that. After the final restraining order, now the state If something happens, if he does something, if he tries to come back and do anything, the state is going to go to court for you, because sometimes we don't. I didn't call right away after I got the final restraining order. I didn't call right away because I didn't want to keep going to court. So I felt like maybe he'll stop banging the door. Maybe he'll stop trying to call me on different numbers and harassing me. He didn't, and I did call. He even broke the windows on my car. He tried different things, and I did call, a lawyer for the state went to the court for me and just updated me, and I felt comfortable, and I had, like I said, the team behind me, and that's why I'm standing here. I want everyone to know that you're not alone, that there are going to be people that are telling you, oh, it's not that serious, and you're walking around, you don't have bruises every day. I don't know, you're able to do, I don't know. They're just going to say so many things. I had so many things thrown at me, like everything was okay, but it wasn't. It just wasn't right. And so there's help. There's a team. There's a team. That's all.
Before we go back to our panel, I have a question for you. So please come back for a moment. Sorry, I don't mean to put you on the spot,
I'm
but your
sorry.
story is compelling.
There's so much I wanted to say, but
From your perspective as a survivor, and thank you for sharing such a courageous story with everybody, what would be your advice to other survivors who they're afraid to leave and get out for all of the reasons that you mentioned in your story?
well, first off, I forget the organization. I wanna actually be able to give this information. There's an organization that helps you move, that helps you get your own place. There are organizations to help you leave. And I mean, the thing is, there's so much I want to say in regards to science. It's like, there's a lot I want to say just for that question, but the pain of leaving, the fear, all of the negative emotions, the change, everything that comes with choosing to leave, they're nothing compared to what you can when you first leave. There's so much I want to say, I'm telling you. So I apologize. I'm not an expert in this. But when you do decide to leave, it's going to be scary. You're going to have fear. I was diagnosed with two different depressions, and I was leaving a toxic relationship, but it was the change. It was leaving everything I've known. But that pain in having that change, it's for such greatness. It's every single TRO that I did, I found a piece of myself. It takes time. It does take time, and I really, really plead for everyone to take the victim seriously. And for the victim, and it's so sad because I hate saying that word. I hate saying that we're victims, but it's worth it. It's going to be scary. You might even be alone, feel alone in it. You're going to second guess yourself, but you can do it. You speak to, I'm telling you, Women's Rights Information Center. I spoke to one person, if I can say your name, Vidalia. I spoke to one person, and then suddenly the world opened up. Suddenly I had 50 people behind me helping me with a whole path that I didn't even know. It's a whole path, I'm telling you. And I don't know how to say this. If you have fear and you're scared to leave, just jump. Just do it. Because you're going to jump into a whole new world. You're not going to fall head first. You're going to jump into a new world with light. You're going to be flying out of the darkness. I don't know how else to say it.
Thank you. Judge Siegel, in the survivor's story, you heard about repeat TROs. You heard about civil restraints. Could you please speak to the judicial process and what advice you would have given not only to this survivor, but to other survivors like them, so they better understand the process of applying for a restraining order and the different options that are available, as well as how to overcome the obstacles which are present, which are economic, financial, housing, and include many others?
So let me begin with the fact that we do see people that come before the court on a regular basis. And the dilemma we have when there is a request by a complainant to withdraw that complaint, they have to be what we call voir dired to make sure that they're doing that intelligently and voluntarily without coercion. But on the other hand, there's something about that story, the underlying facts, and we don't want to dismiss that complaint. And the way it is presented to us, and I guess in this instance, I turn to you as experts, we're told that the complainant knows better their situation than we do, and if they're asking to withdraw the complaint, we should defer to them. I can't say personally, I sometimes did not do that, and I just adjourned the matter in the hopes that upon reflection and with discussion, because I asked that they speak to people like an ADV or SOS or women's rights so that they could, again, get the strength to come back to me. But I know that was a dilemma. Now, sometimes people are fearful. What about the economics? If they file for a restraining order without sufficient monies, where will they be? Because it's their abuser that has been providing them with a lifestyle, but that's not the case. If you are successful getting a restraining order, the person who now has that restraining order is obligated to provide you, one, with payment for the attorney, payment of your medical bills, payment of your counseling, payment of that rent. You can ask for support. You can ask for payment of bills. You can ask for child support. So please know that it does not mean that the ties are cut off from economic success if you go forward with a restraining order. So it's not that. Know that there are people that will guide you through this process, and you're not alone.
Thank you, Judge. This survivor also mentioned many of the obstacles which are present to leaving a toxic and abusive relationship. Kate, I'm going to direct this to you. What is the best way for a survivor to overcome so many obstacles? And you can talk about, of course, the services that Center for Hope and Safety provides. So if a survivor comes into your office and she's unemployed perhaps, she's afraid she can't afford housing, she may be afraid she can't afford to support her child, and she's just afraid of leaving in general, how would you help that survivor?
Do I even need the microphone? Our organizations, we have outreach services. We can help them. We have an economic empowerment team with a career counselor. We offer housing with emergency housing as well as transitional housing. We have Project Child, which she had mentioned, which is a creative arts therapy for children. But I would encourage any survivor to reach out to any of our organizations, because it's not just ours, it's all of us. It's Women's Rights Center, it's ADV, there's thousands of acronyms. And if you're a survivor, just Google Bergen County Domestic Violence Hotline, call any one of them, and one of us will help point you in the right direction, because there are so many services out there. Like there's programs where you can have your month's deposit rent paid. There's many different things that you might be eligible for that you don't even know about. So just contact one of us and we will point you in the right directions for all of us.
And what is your advice for a survivor who's afraid of losing custody of a child if they leave the abuser, who's the other parent?
I encourage you to reach out to us so that you can speak to a lawyer about that. If you do apply for a temporary restraining order, you can get temporary custody as part of that. There's always the presumption that custody goes to a non-abusive parent. But I think, it's really important, if you do have specific legal questions, to speak to a lawyer about that.
And Kathy, this question. Oh, I'm
I
sorry.
just wanted to jump in when you were speaking
Yes.
about, the children. And Regina, I heard you speak about one of the reasons you stayed in the relationship was for your children. And we hear that very often. We know that domestic violence is about power and control. And when there's children shared between the abuser and the victim, almost every time the children, we often think about them witnessing, which is one aspect of it, but they're also often used to exert power and control over the victim. So many times victims stay in the relationship because they are threatened that they will lose custody of the children, which happens sometimes. Or they want to be 100% of the time there to protect the children from their batterer. And if they leave the relationship, even, if they share custody 50-50, the batterer will have those children without the victim's protection, 50% of the time. So we hear that a lot from families, and I just want to, just echo what you were saying. You are certainly not alone in that. Again, what Kate was saying, that we have attorneys we work with, and we encourage victims to link up with an attorney to help them in any custody matter.
And this question is both for Judge Siegel and also for you, Ms. Madler. What would be the court's reaction, I should say response, if you hear a case in which the children witnessed the abuse, witnessed the domestic violence, but may not have necessarily been injured themselves? Would that be an automatic referral? And if it is a referral, Ms. Madler, what would be the division's response?
I would say automatically and clearly, when you come to issue a restraining order which limits contact by an abuser with the victim, it also has the right to limit any contact, prevent any contact between the abuser with the child. Sometimes there's what they call supervised parenting time, I guess, if it's less egregious, but from my vantage point, consistently, we don't permit contact by the abuser with the child until other protocol is followed. So we can order psychiatric examination, a risk assessment, counseling for the abuser. They have to go to a 6-month program to see whether or not they follow some rules and learn some information. But at the end of the day, we are here to protect the child as well as to protect the victim. The two go hand in hand.
Ms. Madler?
I certainly would echo what Judge Siegel said. We also, we are assessing always for what the children have witnessed. What has that impact been on the children? Oftentimes we do see signs of trauma in children who have witnessed abuse in their home and violence in their home. We actually have had numerous instances recently of children actually being physically injured during a domestic violence incident. So again, to echo what I was saying before, our goal is to keep the victim and the children safe. So our goal is, if there's no restraining order that the court is not prohibiting the batterer from having access to either the victim or the child, DCP&P does have the authority to restrain the batterer from the home, from access to the child, and we would then go to court and ask the court to ensure that the batterer either doesn't have access or has supervised parenting time to ensure that the child remains safe.
If I could just supplement it, even an infant reacts to domestic violence. And if I had to give strength to a person who's considering coming forward, who has a child, to appreciate that, if not for yourself, for your child, come forward so that you can protect your youngster, which I'm sure is paramount to every victim.
As mentioned earlier, one of the most pressing subjects of concern among the college students that we spoke about in planning this year's program and symposium was the topic of sexual violence. And as one student asked, she was aware, obviously, that sexual assault is a crime. But she was asking separately whether or not it was also, in addition, an act of domestic violence. And also what remedies and options would be available to a sexual assault victim who seeks protection. So, Jessica, I'll start with you.
So, yes, sexual assault is an enumerated crime in the Domestic Violence Act, but only if you have a qualifying relationship under the Domestic Violence Act, those 4 that I talked about 2.5 hours ago, that it's, a dating or a prior dating relationship, which I think is what we were talking about with the college students who were asking. Now, in New Jersey, there is a law called the Sexual Assault Survivors Protection Act, colloquially known as SASPA, because we're lawyers and we love acronyms. And basically, what SASPA does is it fills a loophole that was left in the domestic violence restraining order law that says that somebody who is a victim of sexual assault but does not qualify for a temporary restraining order under the Prevention of Domestic Violence Act because their relationship with the suspect, assaulter, would-be rapist, doesn't qualify as a dating relationship under the law, can get a restraining order under SASPA. So it was developed to sort of fill in the hole on college campuses for what's known as date rape. So when you have people who may be out on their first date, although I don't think people go on dates anymore on college campuses, but if you have I'm dating myself, no pun intended, but if you have the situation where people are at a party and there's an allegation that somebody is assaulted sexually after a party, but it's not somebody with whom they have a dating relationship with. It's somebody who is just a friend or somebody that they know from around campus. They're not entitled under the domestic violence law to a restraining order because they don't have a dating relationship with them, but they can apply under the Sexual Assault Survivors Protection Act for a SASPA, which is done through a superior court judge, much in the same way as a restraining order would be done, but you don't need that pre-qualifying relationship.
Thank you. Samaza, would you please speak to the same topic, sexual assault as an act of domestic violence itself?
So sexual violence, sexual assault, any non-consensual sexual contact or behavior that occurs without explicit consent of the victim, such as fondling, unwanted sexual touching, attempted rape, forcing victims to perform sexual acts, penetration of the victim's body, any of that is considered sexual violence and acts of sexual assault. Those are oftentimes found in domestic violence instances, in domestic violence relationships. It's in domestic violence relationships, also dating relationships as well. At Healing Space, which is a program of YWCA Northern New Jersey, we support survivors of sexual violence. So while there is a large intersection there's an intersection between domestic violence and sexual violence, our agency focuses solely on sexual violence. So if something like a SASPA is something that you are looking that might fit your needs and a domestic violence restraining order doesn't fit your needs, you can contact our hotline, which is 1-800-487-2227. And our confidential sexual violence advocates will work with you to get you connected to our legal advocacy program that can help walk you through that process.
Thank you.
Something to that as well.
Yes.
I think what's really important, especially with the younger folks, is that they understand how coercion, plays a role in sexual abuse. It may not rise, although it is a crime, it may not rise to the level of a crime because so many young women specifically are being guilted and harassed and begged and pleaded with and threatened to be broken up with or threatened to be cheated on. And so they acquiesce and say, okay, I'll do these sexual things with you. And they really don't want to be. And that still falls under the umbrella of sexual abuse in a relationship. And unfortunately, that's every Saturday night USA or the planet, and this is happening often. And for so many of these women, these young girls especially, who are experiencing this, if you ask them, have you been sexually abused in your relationship? Most of them will say, no. What are you talking about? I said yes. And they're not understanding that that's coercion. That's not a, yes, I really want to do this with you. It's a, well, you're going to cheat on me or break up with me or make me feel guilty, so yes. And so a lot of what we do is we spend time educating. We all have a real responsibility to educate our young people. And this is for any type of same-sex relationships. It doesn't matter. It can happen to young men as well. But young women are specifically at a much, much higher rate of this happening too.
Thank you, Allison. I also wanted to add, defining it is so important, and that's where prevention education comes into play. And so a part of our program is we are out in the community, in schools, in high schools, working with groups, kind of getting the word out on what this is so folks can define what it is, right? So when we think of rape, we have this image, right, of what that looks like. We could never think that somebody we love, know, and trust would rape us, when in fact it happens more often than not by somebody that you know and trust. So I think education is the first step in kind of getting rid of all this and working ourselves out of a job, because we have to be able to define it. We can't call it what it is unless we know what it is.
Thank you. Susan, what would you tell a survivor the warning signs are to get out?
If a relationship does not feel good, it's time to get out. So any type of coercive behavior, manipulation, if you don't do this, I'm leaving, any type of threats, lack of respect, blaming, you made me do this, you made me angry. We all have control over ourselves, so anger is a normal human emotion. That doesn't mean that when an individual gets angry, they can be unkind, physical, or any other inappropriate behavior. Equality, whether it's financial, everyone should have a say. Privilege, whether it's education, whether it's male, whether it's race, those are all very unhealthy warning signs. A relationship moving too quickly, it's time to take a step back and figure out how to safely get out of the relationship. And leaving is not an event. It's a journey, it's planned, and one should be at a place that they could leave safely.
Thank you. Kathy, what is your advice to the survivor who is stuck in the cycle and is having difficulty emotionally leaving the relationship?
I think it's important for someone to, I don't know if I'm on. Okay. I think it's important for someone to be able to review for themselves what they've learned, what they're aware of, to use their own experiences, their own feelings, their own words. you know, sometimes I will mirror or reflect back what I hear someone saying, because emotionally that may not add up for them, but when they hear back what they've said, they recognize what limits there are to their expectations and this relationship. They realize how unbalanced it's become. Again, my training is allowing for someone's self-determination, respecting their decisions, their views. The last thing someone who has been controlled needs to hear is, you need to go. But helping them get to that point, helping someone see that, you know, you have worked hard, you have tried. I keep hearing from you, these things keep happening. What does that show you? Is important. Obviously, you know, danger. We talk about danger. We talk about the risks. We go over something called a framework we use is the Jacqueline Campbell Danger Assessment. We will tell someone you are at a very high risk of lethality because of these incidents, or, you know, your child may be acting out in school because they don't feel safe to act out at home. Your child may be responding to the trauma. There are options, as our guest speaker pointed out, there are supports, there are options. It's scary. Where are you? How are you feeling about this? How can we support you in this?
Thank you. And I just want to take a moment to reiterate what we say every year. It's the survivors who inspire us to do the work that we do. Thank you for your inspiration. Olivia, I'm going to close with you.
Okay.
What advice would you have for another survivor who's afraid to leave?
I think the biggest advice that I would give to another survivor who's afraid to leave is tell somebody. I think one of my biggest mistakes looking back that I made for way too long was that I was suffering in silence. And I think that's a really common thing to do because there's a lot of shame attached to the stigma. You know, like I said in the beginning, I'm a dance teacher, and I can remember going to the dance studio in the middle of the summertime with long sleeve shirts on because I didn't want anyone to see my arms because they were all bruised up. But there's a freedom when you tell somebody. And when I love what you said when you said the light comes flying in, and it's so true. That was the most beautiful thing I've heard all night. And I think there's just a freedom about speaking your truth, and it's amazing how many people want to help, but you have to be willing to open up your mouth and, you know, just ask and you will receive. And just being able to get over that hump of fear. And the crazy thing is that most of us who are living in a violent situation, that's probably the scariest place in the world to be already. So if you can just get past that, then you're going to be on the right road.
Thank you. We're very fortunate since we've started this program that we not only have continued it here in New Milford every year, we've been offered support to do so as well, to have more symposiums around the county. To that end, we're also joined tonight by two of our Bergen County commissioners, Commissioner Sullivan and Commissioner Zur. I would like to ask Commissioner Zur to say a few words.
The end. I want to say thank you so much, Matt, to the entire council, but to every single one of these panelists and inspiring speakers, to our Bergen County Prosecutor's Office, our Sheriff's Department, and everyone who's on the front lines every single day, dealing and moving folks who are victims to survivors. And, you know, as we were dealing with this pandemic, as we were facing lockdowns and economic ramifications, my heart immediately went to so many who were locked down with their abusers. And when I heard from so many on the front lines that the calls were slowing, that the calls were stopping because victims could not make their safe exit plans, there was just no bandwidth to do that. I knew then, and I know that you all witnessed, that tsunami that came afterwards and that it continues to come. And it's going to continue to be there as well as we're dealing with the mental health ramifications in general of you know, when you feel fearful and out of control, it's control and domination is an unfortunate offset of that. And so we as the County of Bergen, all of us on the Board of Commissioners, Commissioner Sullivan, myself and all of my colleagues, as well as County Executive Tedesco, stand 1,000% behind not only our Alternatives to Domestic Violence program, but to all of the agencies represented up here, and for everyone who's on the ground doing this work. It is so, so important. And we are, you know, I love the whole team behind you concept because this is an entire team. I want this team every single day behind me. They are the rock stars. They are the ones who are moving people to that light that you described so very eloquently. And so I want to also add a special thank you, and she doesn't know I'm doing this, Susan, but Susan DiGiacomo is retiring after 27 years of service to the county, 24 and a half of them in our Alternatives to Domestic Violence. And on behalf of the Board of Commissioners, I want to add our thank you. You, for 25 years, have been such a stalwart advocate, not missing a beat, not just through this pandemic, but for the last 24 and a half years, fighting for the victims, making sure that they find their voices, and being that strength throughout the department that was moving things to the better. And so on behalf of all of us, I want to say thank you and good luck in this next chapter. And we're not going to let you go so easily. I know that you're always going to be there for us, as you have always been there for those in our community who have needed you. So I'm going to just walk this over to you right now and say thank you to all of you who are standing up every single day. I'm sorry, back to the camera, but I just want to say thank you, because what you have done, I have been very present on the food side of this conversation through the pandemic and worked with so many of you as you're stretching to meet the needs of more and more victims who need your support in so many ways that you couldn't have anticipated before the pandemic. And we will continue to stand with you and stand with those in our community who need our help. So congratulations, Susan. Thank you for your service.
And we also thank Susan for her many years of service. As we do every year, thank you to the mayor. Thank you to the mayor and council of New Milford. Thank you to the New Milford Public School District. Thank you, Superintendent Shanley. Thank you to the Board of Education. Thank you, New Milford Police Department. Thank you, Prosecutor's Office. Thank you, Sheriff's Department. Thank you, Board of Commissioners. I thank each agency that's here. I thank our survivors who came and bravely shared their stories. Most importantly, I thank those of you who are watching and listening, because by doing that, you can be the change. You can help a person in need. Thank you. I also thank Ramapo College for their assistance in planning this program this year. Thank you. We'll see you next year.